This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in edtech, spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver effective, customized, and engaging learning experiences for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hello, everyone. My name's Ladek, and today my guest is Kirsten Rourke. She has been an e-learning and development speaker, technical trainer, and consultant since 2000. She owns and operates Rourke Training, which provides speaking and training services. When she's not playing video games obsessively or singing show tunes mostly on key, she works as a consultant and speaker helping others develop presenting and training skills using her prep, practice, and pivot model. She can be found presenting at industry events such as DevLearn or at rourketraining.com. In this adaptable stage presence conversation, Kirsten and I talk about her path for the past 20 years working with people to help them adapt to the moment by presenting training situations and working on online spaces to create engagement with audiences. We then talk about her tips, tricks, and examples of how to communicate effectively in hybrid work situations, a critical skill for anyone asked to adapt to this new way of working without receiving any support. Then, based on Kirsten's experience, we talk about what her recommendations are about how to adapt faster or acquire needed skills for remote workers. Then we talk about how Kirsten navigates the adaptability in e-learning projects. Does she focus on a budget? Does she look at team dynamics, or is it something else? And in the age of ChatGPT and Google, how do these types of tools allow instructors or teachers to adapt faster in learning and development? We then tie our conversation together by talking about what is the new role of instructors or librarians in creating the muscle of adaptability in the learning space. And remember, we record this podcast live so that we can interact with you, our audience, in real time. So if you'd like to join the fun every week on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube, just come over to elearnmagazine.com and subscribe. Now, I give you Kirsten Rourke. Kirsten, we're going to talk about managing adaptability, building the muscle of being adaptable. As we're talking about learning teams, as we're talking about being a learner, as we're talking about managing in general. And so I'm excited about this. Before we dive into that particular topic, tee yourself up for me. Tell us about who you are, where you came from, and what you put on the table for your clients today.
Fantastic. Thank you. So what I do is my entire thing is I have two things that I do. I work with people on being able to adapt in the moment in presenting and training situations based on 20 years in the field of being in every possible situation and having them turn into a hairball and doggy paddling my way out of it. Mixing my metaphors a little there, but you get the idea.
I love that one.
Hairball, doggy paddle. Not quite right. And then also being able to work in an online space to create engagement with audiences is something that is a disconnect for a lot of instructors because they're so used to their in-person skill set and it maps differently in the online space. So I work with people on being able to make those connections so that they know where that skill set applies.
And have you been able to start, or are you starting to see in your practice more and more high flex, hybrid? Like I have to change on a daily basis, or is that a topic you're seeing now?
Yeah, what's funny is that I managed to land, yay me, I landed my first TEDx, yay, and I did it on this subject.
Okay.
And in it, I talk about the fact that I'm having people come to me saying, I have to be in person, which is fine. But I have others coming to me saying, I have to be in person because I can't be online. I can't be engaging. I can't be connected. And I'm like, no.
Mhm.
That's actually something that's workable. So hybrid is something that those of us who've been doing it a long time have really gotten our sea legs. We're doing really well with it. But the people who got thrown into it in the pandemic, when that started, a lot of them are still struggling. A lot of them, the mapping of what you do in person and what you do online is not intuitive unless you've been doing it long enough that it kind of has become part of your behavior. So for a lot of folks, it's like, okay, wait a minute. Think about it this way. If you ask this question like this in the real world, it does not work online. But if you ask it like this online, it works beautifully, whereas that would be rude in the real world
Mm.
and things like that.
Is
Like,
there like a specific example you could give it, like where it would work in the real world but not online and vice versa or whatever?
yeah, opening a session for housekeeping, when you're doing the greeting the room, the warming up the room thing, in person, I would go in and be like, "Okay, let's get to know each other. So, where would you go on vacation if you could go anywhere in the world? Tell me, I'm giving you $1 million. Where are you going?"
Mm,
That open-ended question works beautifully.
mm,
Online, horrible idea
mm,
because you're asking people to most of the time not they're not able to unmute. A lot of times you have people, especially larger audiences, stuck in a chat pod, and then you're asking them to write War and Peace. So
mm,
you want to instead do something you wouldn't do in person, where you'd go, "Are you drinking coffee? Yes or no?"
mhm,
In real
mhm.
world, live, that's rude. But sorry, in person, that's rude. In the virtual world, you can go, "All right, I'm rocking the coffee today. What are you drinking? Everybody just tell me what you're drinking. Come on, throw it into the chat. Let me see. Mango Pepsi?
Right.
Really?"
Mhm,
Like, that's where you want to roll with it and do really short hits that have people's hands on the keyboard or on whatever their adaptive device is, and getting them into the communication within 2 minutes is really important because they have to get over the fact that it's not intuitive as well.
Hi, I'm jumping into the conversation real quick to ask you a very simple, quick favor. If you are enjoying what you're listening to right now, if it's interesting, if it's entertaining, if you're pulling away value, if you're learning something, whatever the case may be, do me a favor and just hit subscribe on your podcast player right now. It's if it's on your phone, if you're listening on a computer, whatever it is, just take 2 seconds right now, hit subscribe. It helps us. You'll never miss an episode, and everybody wins. And if you really like this content, a lot, come on over to eLearn Magazine, throw your email address in there and subscribe there as well for other great content around our blog posts, around the events we play, and of course, this podcast as well. Thank you very much. And now back to the show.
So what are you when you're talking with clients, when you're talking with individuals, what are the fears or the roadblocks or the mental breaks around being adaptable, or
Mm,
you know what I'm saying? Like
yeah.
I think we all do it extemporaneously. We do it naturally because you have to. But when you start talking to somebody about, hey, you need to be more adaptable. Like, what do people come back to you and say? What are their blocks?
Well, one of the things is I have to do X amount of content. And the disconnect is once you're getting into the virtual space and especially the hybrid space, you have even more interruptions than you have in person.
Mm,
So in person, you might have somebody suddenly doing in the middle of your class, "Oh, so and so's retiring. So we have to step out for half an hour and cut cake. So we'll be back. Sorry, we forgot to tell you." And all of a sudden, you have half an hour of your material you have to flex around. Well,
mhm, mhm,
online, you have a lot more of that. You have people being pulled away, you have technology issues, you have the fact that longer periods online are harder for a lot of people. So you have to really accordion your content, which means that even though we have set content we want to cover, we have to shift the focus the way it should have always been shifted, which is on the
mhm.
learner and
Okay.
less on the content. So you have to highlight the pieces that are absolutely critical and then ideally practice with your team to pull those out and do just those live in the moment so that you basically, if I was doing it to you, I would say, "Okay, we looked at the themes and the categories in your content. I'm taking number 1 and number 7, put those together, go." And then for you, it's like, um, okay. And it's awkward and uncomfortable. But then you look at it and we talk through how would you discuss it? And you practice doing that in the moment, but not in front of clients. not in front of your boss, not in front of customers. You do it with other people who do what you do. You
Mhm.
practice before you're ever on stage, which is something we never let instructors do. But if you're doing online, you have to. You have to be able to practice adapting in the moment and throwing curveballs at yourself of, oh, no deck. All right, we're going to work without a deck. What does that look like? And things like that. So you really want to get especially your less experienced people into a safe environment and then say, I'm going to throw a bunch of just hairy curveballs at you. They're going to be awful and ugly, but this is a private space. No one will ever see this.
I was just that
So here,
you stole you stole my question there. Is like I would your recommendation is put block a time on your calendar once a month
oh yeah,
and just and literally have somebody come in with
oh yeah.
and is that have three students in the room with you, or is that just have somebody looking over your shoulder and it's like, hey, guess what, the internet just went out, or hey, guess what, your deck didn't show up, or whatever, like how do you structure that?
Well, with some folks, I make a game of it. We put together, cards like flip cards and
Mm,
little index cards, and we say, okay, what are the things that would absolutely just, oh my God, please don't let this happen. Let's write that one down. And you get
mhm.
6 of them. And then you shuffle the deck and go, okay, we're going to
There it
get on a
is.
Zoom and I'm going to just roll through and pick one of the cards and go, okay, it's this
Mhm,
one. How will we deal with that? And then we talk through dealing with it. And I don't want anyone to have to do what I did. In
mm,
22 years, I was, on the ground doing this. If all of a sudden we're not allowed to reschedule the class, but the power's out.
mhm.
Great. Now what do? I have a Sharpie marker and a legal pad. Let's go to the cafeteria, you know? And all of a sudden I'm teaching Adobe Illustrator theory and intro to Bezier curves with a legal pad because you can't reschedule the class. Stuff like that. Newer people, there's no slack anymore. There's
Mm,
no time for them to learn it. There's no freedom for them to learn it. If they make those mistakes online, that's their job at risk, and people don't understand how hard it is. So the stuff that we developed over the years, boots on the ground, we have to train people on. We have to really give them that experience. Um, I was prepped beautifully by one person before doing a sales rollout, and we went to Europe. 2 of us did Europe. One person did the Asia Pacific by herself.
wow. Mm,
Yeah, ugh. One did North America, one did South America, and we were told, "You can't reschedule the class. You're on your own. Nobody can help you. Make it work. No matter what happens, make it work." And I got there, and my first country was Germany, and the contact person came up to me and said, we have a problem.
mm.
The most important thing we need is at the end of the course. And our computers get slow when America wakes up. So I need you to put that at the beginning. Can you do it backwards?" And the rule was you had to say yes, right? So I went, oh, of course I can. Sure. And I went back to my hotel and I screamed into a pillow until I couldn't scream anymore. And I flipped my slides and I figured out how to narratively tell the story backwards.
Mm,
And I thought that was going to be the worst experience of that trip. And I was wrong.
yeah.
The second day, I went to Portugal, and the country manager who I was teaching, who is a very, very beautiful man, very,
Mm,
very lovely, he's all into himself,
mm,
came into the room and sat down and said, "You have 4 hours of content. I'm very busy. I will give you 90 minutes."
mhm,
And I said, "I have 4 hours of content, sir. I have to cover this content." And he said, "I will give you 90 minutes." He gave me 45. And I had to keep bribing him to get him to not get coffee and not get on a phone call and not wander off. And it was herding cats to a degree I'd never had to do before. And I had to, on the fly, pull the things that were critical and pull those out and cover just those in between chasing this clown back into his chair
mhm, mhm.
politely.
Sure, of course, yeah.
And those experiences are what I tell my students about. Well, not students, my clients about, because I don't want anyone to have to go through that. It's funny
Mhm.
in hindsight, but in 2001, I was crying on the phone talking about this.
You said
I was calling home going, "I can't believe they made me do this. It was awful." And now it's like, that was funny.
Yeah, sure. So, well, it's funny, but it still happens today. And so when I'm thinking about,
Yeah.
every L&D department or every L&D manager, or every department in a college or a university right now. I mean, every professor is supposed to structure their semester, or every L&D department's like, hey, look, what's our budget for the year? What are the business changes that are happening, and how are we going to? So we plan.
Yep.
Is it just like budgets in your experience when you're talking with your clients, where, hey, we're going to put a budget together, but that's just sort of the reality on day one, and then you kind of throw it out, and then let's see what really happens? Or is it really just, have you found that being adaptable is it more about those momentary things where it's like, as you said, you show up in Germany and you have to flip the script? Or is it like, juxtapose that with like the arc of, here was our plan and we're going to have to evolve it over this year, or we're going to have to evolve over this semester? Like, how did those two differ in your mind?
So I love that question. There's the dirt level, which is you show up and, for example, the wrong software was installed
Mm,
and on the wrong day.
been there.
Great. Um, all of that kind of stuff. I showed up to a class that I had prepped and said, this is not my normal stuff. I will prep it for you because you're stranded, but it can only be intro level. I've prepped this to death, but do not give me intermediate students. And every single person in there was a trainer of the software.
Mm, mhm,
And it was supposed to be a new features class that they forgot to communicate that. And so I came in to teach intro, and I had to look at them and say, I'm sorry, I literally am not qualified to teach you.
mhm.
And I pulled myself out. I
Ah,
called my contact and said, get me out of here. I have
mhm,
no business in front of these people.
right.
So that's the stuff that happens. But on the overarching piece, what happens in L&D is that people don't understand what we do well enough. And a lot of that, unfortunately, is our fault,
Mm,
because historically L&D has not tied it to business goals and explained it in business terms
uh-huh.
in a way that turns that light bulb on for people. Like, we're naturally instructors. A lot of people aren't. So having that built into their DNA is really not something that we can have happen. And if we could, we shouldn't, because
Mhm,
genetic engineering, bad. So it would be really good if, like, everybody understood that the flow of content had to flow based on who's in the audience, what's happening, what the learning objectives are, what the business objectives are, all of that. But you really, as an L&D person, have to take what you know to be true, take what matters to the different people in business at the different tiers and their different priorities. So C-suite, you're talking productivity and cost. Management, you're talking, okay, retention, and
mhm,
I'm sorry, C-suite, reputation and cost, management, productivity and retention. Like, you have to talk two different scripts there,
mhm,
tie what you're doing to that, sell them on it. And then you have the ability to say, by the way, this is going to flex over time, because
mhm.
depending on who's coming, this is a living, breathing thing. Training is not only a band-aid, but butts and seats does not equal magic anywhere on the planet. It's all about the humans. So what's happening with the humans? What we're doing is a dynamic performance skill set, and it has to adapt to the people in the room.
Mhm.
So if you're not flexing your training over time, that means that essentially you might as well be making a video, because the people in the room don't matter.
I
And
think that
that's a
yeah,
huge
that's,
problem.
I think that's going to be a soundbite that I pull out of your but you just hit the nail on the head. So now take that one more step for me in the age of the Google search,
Yeah.
right? Because this is the reality of today, where I'm a worker, especially if I'm an information worker. If I have a question, I'm going to ask Google first, try to find the immediate answer.
Yep.
If I'm a highly skilled, highly technical, I'm an engineer, or I'm building something that's less available to me, but it's still probably my go-to resource.
Yep.
As
Like,
the L&D professional, as the L&D manager, adapting to this reality, what are your pieces? Ooh, Angel, she's back.
thank you, Angel.
um,
Sorry. This is
no
what happens when
worries.
you have a sick kid and a dog. Yeah.
I totally get it. Totally
Yeah.
get it.
Um, yeah.
Talk to me about that reality in terms of in the lens of adaptability as the L&D professional, as the instructor. What are you doing in order to say, you're in the middle of the class, and I know this happens with my kids, right? So like my 14-year-old, he'll be Googling the answer while he's in class, while the
Mhm.
instructor's, or I'm talking to him. He's like, no, I already looked it up. Here's the, like
Yeah.
how does that work for you?
I what I would do is actively facilitate that and say, "Okay, I'm gonna show you how to do a bad Google search and how to do a good Google search."
Mm,
One of the things you can do is get bad answers by not using Google correctly. So let's work on that. And
mhm,
then if you have people who tend to jump off like that, highlight them and use them. Like get to a certain point in your material and go, "Okay, stop. I'm going to give you all 5 minutes. Who can find the answer on Google? Ready? Go."
mhm, mhm.
And then just make it a game. Like change it up because one of the problems that we face both in higher education and in corporate with training is that the traditional model is broken. Like it's shaken. It's at its core. The foundation is now no longer stable.
Mhm.
People are expecting things from us that are not part of what we have traditionally always done, and we're not going back.
Right.
So we have to change, which means making bite-sized content, which means making, learning moments or having a podcast or having an app or whatever where it's like, okay, you want to handle your education yourself. That's great. We're going to have check-in moments in which I'm just going to make sure that what you're learning is actually accurate. Let's do that.
Mhm.
Let's come in and I'm going to give you a real world example to work on and let's see how you did.
Mm.
Unparentheses, unspoken, smart boy, you
Yeah.
know. So little part of it's like, you can do my job. Let's dance.
Oh,
It's like, come on, let's have that. I mean, I've done that in a Photoshop class. I had this beautiful 20-year-old girl, very, all together, smart as hell, and what a pain in the butt. She kept throwing out, oh, well, I know how to do that. Oh, everybody does that. Oh, that's so easy. And I'd been 15 years in at this point. So I was like, oh, oh, you sweet summer child. Let's party. And I threw the most obscure stuff at her, like, oh, well, of course you do this. She
Mhm,
went, what?
mm,
I
mhm.
didn't know it was you do math in Photoshop. I'm like, oh, yeah. No, you've never created your own filters. Oh, well, let me show you how.
Mhm.
And within 10 minutes, she stopped disrupting my class and started listening to me. But I
Excellent.
had to show her, like, yes, you're very smart, honey. We all love you. We all appreciate you. Knock it off and let me work. You
Mm.
know, sometimes you have to push back a little bit.
So, final kind of question for you, which riffs off of what you're talking about there, is how much have the roles of instructor, and I'm going to use the term librarian,
Hmm.
mashed together now, both in, I guess, in the higher education space, which is where most of our people are. Like the professor
Okay.
has the reason why you go to a particular professor is because they're the curator of knowledge, right? They have
Yeah.
either been down a research path, or they have they've been in it so long enough that they've curated. They say, oh, no, I've made the mistakes, and I'm going to show you where we're at today.
Yep.
Here's where we're going to go next. But I'm wondering, is the same thing now we're seeing in L&D in the corporate space, where again, Google searches one. It's like, hey, wait, you've okay, you found a great 1, 2, 3 on how to fix this. But now let's go tell everybody else, or let's put it somewhere
Yeah.
where everybody else doesn't have to go do the search. How much are you seeing that curation becoming a part of the muscle of adaptability for your clients, for the people who you work with?
Unless you show them how to do it and coach them on the value of it,
Mm,
not usually.
mm,
One of the things that it seems to be a real sticking point for people is letting go of the control of the normal way of doing things is so hard. The idea of having other people, like bringing in knowledge, putting it in a wiki, and then you not being the sole voice, that's very threatening for people. And I get that. Um, it's a shift of role. Going from instructor to librarian, librarians are superpowers.
oh yeah,
That's an
yeah.
amazing job, but it feels like a different space and it feels like a different level of authority.
Mm,
So unfortunately, there's a lot more improv required in our field than ever before. And it was actually always required, but we could ignore it before. And now we can't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's one of the issues.
Yeah, I see. I've just been sort of fascinated as well at I want to say the renaissance of the library, as well as
Mm,
the the superhero kind of feeling of the librarian, and especially in, you know, in spaces where you wouldn't find it, right? Because of, again, the interwebs, libraries have become, in many people's minds, not important anymore. And
mm.
yet here they are. These are spaces where people gather, where community is created, where, you're exposed to new things, where events happen, right? And so
Yeah.
when I think about the learning space and adapting that skill set, again, tying it back to, what we're talking here today, I find it a fascinating opportunity for companies. Extant knowledge, the
Yeah.
knowledge in your experts' heads is still in my mind, the number one thing that companies lose every day, that they can't figure out how to pull out.
Yes.
So that's me on my
Yeah.
soapbox.
Oh,
Sorry.
no, 100%. Libraries are completely unappreciated as life-changing institutions.
Mhm.
And I mean, honestly, they need a much better PR department.
Mm.
Like, we need a high-end New York PR firm to just take on the mission of pushing library science as what it is, which
Mm.
is an amazing gift for humans. Like, the fact that we have that ability to share with other people and to consolidate knowledge and to be able to steer people and show them the flex of information and say, okay, you want to follow a path, but by the way, did you know all of these things are part of it?
Mhm.
And it's just, ongoing mastery is what we do as learning professionals, and librarians are, they're masters at ongoing mastery. That's one of their gifts.
Fantastic. Kirsten Rourke, you have been talking to us and teaching us about adaptability, managing adaptability, being more adaptable. How do people find you? And you haven't even mentioned your podcast once. So how do they listen to you? Like, where should we find you, and where should we listen to you?
Well, Rourke, so like O'Rourke without the O. Rourke
Okay.
Training is
Hmm.
where I am on. That's where I do my coaching and consulting practice. I'm Kirsten Rourke on socials, or Rourke Training on socials, and Ongoing Mastery Presenting and Speaking is my podcast.
Oh,
And we are scheduling season 3 guests right now, so we actually have a year in the can. Go
yeah.
us!
Oh, nice. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on the eLearn podcast today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Thank you again for listening to the eLearn podcast. I just wanted to take one last moment here to ask you to, if you enjoyed this episode, if you learned something, if you had fun, if you liked the guest, if you wanted to learn more, if you feel like sharing this with somebody, do me a favor. Hit subscribe on your podcast player right now. Just do it right now before the episode ends. Hit subscribe, and that way you'll never miss an episode as we publish them every week. Thanks.